were not terrorists. And indeed, he said, quote, "If someone has never made a ripple in the pond in Syria in a way that would get their identity or their interest reflected in our database, we can query our database until the cows come home, but there will be nothing to show up because we have no record on them." Do you agree with the head of the FBI that we cannot vet these refugees to make sure that they're not terrorists?
I agree with the quote. I don't agree that that extends to, quote, "we cannot vet the refugees." In fact, I think there's extensive evidence that we can vet the refugees.
And how successful do you think that vetting has been?
Again, I point to the fact that 7% of all Syrian applicants, we're just taking that particularly concerning group as the example, have been denied either because information about them has arisen in various law enforcement or intelligence databases, or because during the course of interview we have determined them to not be credible. Roughly double that number, perhaps a little bit less, placed on hold, no action taken on their...
But Mr. Rodriguez, with all respect, that's an odd measure to say the vetting's successful because we've turned some people down.
Turned a lot of people down.
Well, let's ask, if vetting is successful, it is preventing terrorists from coming to America. So let me ask it a different way. In the 8 years of the Obama administration, how many refugees admitted to this country have been implicated in terrorism?
We've talked about this during the hearing. There have been a number of cases. Most of them.
How many? I'm asking.
I don't know I can't tell you the exact number. I know that the number is, to your point, significant.
Let me ask you, why can't you tell me the exact number? If you're concerned about if the vetting is working, I would think the Department of Homeland Security would have every incentive to know every single instance.
I think what really matters in the discussion about these cases is looking at those cases and determining if there are things that we should have done differently. That is one of the reasons, for example, that the interagency checks were implemented. Lessons that were learned because of admissions that occurred a while ago resulted in changes. So every single time a new case arises, that is a discussion that I have, that is a discussion my staff has, our intelligence partners, about what could we do differently in order for there to be an improvement in the way we do.
So I agree that learning from the mistakes of the past is important. And so I'm going to ask you, will you provide this committee in writing with an answer to my question, specifically the number of how many refugees admitted in the last 8 years have been implicated in terrorism?
As best we can, we will respond to your questions.
Okay. I can tell you from the public domain, we're aware of at least 20 individuals, but there may be far more because these are public domain and you have records that we don't have access to.
Yeah, I think Senator Sessions has identified about 40 cases, actually, so we can go through those.
And there are instances, 2 in my home state of Texas just recently. In January of 2016, Omar Faraj Saeed al-Hardan was charged in an indictment with attempting to provide material support to a foreign terrorist organization, making false statements and attempting to procure citizenship or naturalization unlawfully. And al-Hardan was a Palestinian born in Iraq. He was admitted to the United States as a refugee in 2009, and he obtained a green card in 2011. And according to media accounts, al-Hardan told his wife, "I will go to Syria. I want to blow myself up. I am against America." In your view, did the vetting process work well, admitting al-Hardan as a refugee?
I wouldn't speak to a specific case. Obviously, if there was derogatory information that we missed, that is an area of concern about that specific case. I won't speak about that one. I will say that we review every new case and ask ourselves, is there something that we should have done differently?
Another instance also in Texas on February 5th, 2015, Abdel Nasser Mohammed Ibrahim was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for conspiring to provide material support to al-Shabaab, a designated foreign terrorist network, and for making false statements in immigration paperwork. Now, Ibrahim is a native of Somalia, came as a refugee in 2007 at the age of 22, and was subsequently given a green card. We keep seeing instances over and over again of refugees coming to America with an intention to engage in terrorism. And ISIS has made clear that they intend to exploit our refugee program, to send terrorists to America to commit murder, to murder innocent Americans. How can you assure the American people that we are not right now admitting more terrorists who would wage jihad against our nation?
Because we conduct the process in a manner that is designed to do everything within our power to screen out individuals who mean us harm, beginning with the screening criteria that are given to UNHCR, the fact that people are interviewed multiple times before even one of my officers sees them.
But the interviews aren't catching these individuals. We're letting them in. There are those cases. There are also a number of cases where we've stopped people from traveling to the United States. And what I'm telling you is, as time has gone on, the process has become better and better. There are things that we are doing today that we weren't doing 2 years ago. There are even some things we're doing now that we weren't doing a year ago. And so we are continuing to strengthen the process further and further so that we can, in fact, have the highest possible. It's not going to eliminate all risk. But we are doing it so that we can have the highest level of confidence that we can, that we are not admitting threats.
Good morning. I was afraid I couldn't see over the podium. Worked out. Good morning. I'm Jane Harmon, President and CEO of the Wilson Center, recovering politician, and very delighted about this event this morning. Let me welcome a few guests. Ambassador Martin de Hinden of Switzerland, Ambassador Andris Teikmanis of Latvia, our former chairman, Joe Gildenhorn, Ambassador Joe Gildenhorn, and his wife Alma, and daughter Kathy, and a number of our cabinet members and dearest supporters. Thank you all for coming. In August, I went with my 8-year-old grandson and a few family members to Poland. Poland has bravely faced its role in World War II as the killing field for over 3 million Jews and others. In a small town in southeast Poland, I walked a trail into the woods where members of my own family were forced to march to an open pit where they were shot in the back with 1,250 others. Seeing that level of depravity up close is a brutal experience, one the world should never forget and never repeat. But since then, there has been Rwanda and Srebrenica, and now Syria. Some countries have tried to address the growing horror. 500,000 dead, half the country displaced, and historical artifacts and towns reduced to rubble. In today's New York Times, it says that 250,000 people are cowering in basements in East Aleppo with no food, no light, no school, no future. 100,000 of those are children. Stopping the killing and addressing the refugee crisis is complicated because there are so many agendas. Those who try to help, like Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel, face challenges in their own political parties. But one man keeps trying. No matter how daunting the odds, that man is Secretary John Kerry. And through the decades of our friendship and collaboration, I have never admired him more. Thank you, John, for coming to the Wilson Center for the first time as Secretary of State and for addressing a different subject directly in our sweet spot, the importance of trade. I was one of 25 Democratic members of Congress who voted for Trade Promotion Authority in 2002. I gather that number went up to 28 in 2015, out of 186. You don't have to take it from me. Two major CEOs have written an op-ed in the Washington Post today.
Good afternoon, or good morning, rather. Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. A question for Mr. Martyr to begin. You said that the media is giving a one-sided story of Syria, a one-sided presentation. When you are not invited to Syria to look at Damascus, where do you receive your information about what's happening in Syria? To what outlets do you turn? And a question for Mr. Lohendorf. You mentioned that, I believe this is sort of partly a quote, but that what you saw in Syria, and rather in the capital, belies the well-orchestrated propaganda about Syria. That would seem a bit like saying you visited Middle America because you've seen Manhattan. Do you believe a visit to Homs or Aleppo or other cities around the country would enable you to speak more about the situation across the country as a whole?
He asked what information, how do you get information when you don't go to Syria? Where do you get information?
Well, those of us who are in the peace movement have to read the same press that everybody else reads and tries to determine the issues. I just want to add to what I said before. I don't know if people realize that for the last 8 years, every day the U.S. has been involved in wars. Every single day of the Obama administration has been devoted to war. And if you compared the media approach, the U.S. State Department approach to Syria, there's a familiarity. It's Noriega, it's Hussein, it's Gaddafi, one after another, in order to convince the American people that we have the moral responsibility to intervene. And unfortunately, this institution plays along. With it. This is not accidental. This has confused some of my dearest allies and friends who have said, just like they said about the others, how can you trust them? Without looking at the major issue, what right do we have to intervene in the sovereign responsibility of a people? We're hoping to go back to our friends and allies in the U.S. peace movement and say, we don't have to agree on Assad. We don't have to agree on the government. What we have to agree on is that the sovereign right of a people to determine their own destiny. Period. That the media has played a nefarious role. It's confused people who have spent their entire lives fighting against war and the struggle for peace.
Wait a minute, I have to answer his second part, if that's okay.
Well, we've waited through 50 minutes of your commentary, and that leaves us 10 minutes to ask questions. So if you really want the media to understand what's going on, you need to hear from the media.
But he asked a second question, so I'm answering his question, if you don't mind.
But there are other
I'll be
media people.
brief,
Okay,
yes,
good.
and then we'll take you. So you asked, okay, so we saw 5 days, 6 days of Syria. How do we know the truth? We only know what we saw, and what we saw goes against everything that we read in the United States. What we do right now, here today, is urge you to stop listening to the people that the U.S. government brings out from the Muslim Brotherhood and from ISIS and all the other terrorist organizations. Stop listening to them and go to Syria. The president of Syria said, bring delegations. See for yourself. That's the answer. What we saw is what we're reporting. If you don't have to trust us, but at least accept that there's another picture. I'll take your question, please.
Who finances your group? Does the Syrian government give you money to fly to Damascus and travel around Syria? And given that you talked to Bashar al-Assad for 2 hours, did you bring up the issue of barrel bombing by the Syrian government and its allies? And did you discuss the cessation of hostilities that are supposed to be happening? It's just some of my questions. Thanks.
Right. Everyone on the delegation paid his or her own way to Syria. It's $1,200 to $1,500 round trip. The Syrian government provided us with security and access to all of the people we asked to see and visit, as many as we could. The Syrian government also covered half of our accommodations, and we covered the rest. That's the truth. You can make of that whatever you want. In terms of meeting with President Assad, we did not ask about barrel bombing. Barrel bombing is a term that the United States uses, like Scud missiles, a nasty word. What we learned from him and from others is that when the terrorists destroy something, they show pictures and say it's the Assad government. Bombing, no matter who does it, is likely to kill civilians. We know that. They know that. But when an outside force, like the United States and its allies, invade with mercenaries, you expect the consequences that we've seen, which is a lot of loss of life and a lot of people fearing for their lives leaving. Most of the